Mission accomplished. Nice Zoom. Glad we have that.
Oh my gosh.
Welcome back to Tubbs the Club, your University of Idaho affiliate on the Big Sky Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brian Marceau, back from a couple-week hiatus. We're also joined. You'll notice Dallas is not here. You know what? I'm not going to justify missing work. People miss work sometimes, so whatever. Nah, Dallas has shit going on. But Marten, producer redacted, going to be a little bit more than producer redacted today. How's it going, dude?
It's going good. It's finally warmed up in Moscow after our near sub-zero temperatures we had last week, and I'm just happy to be back on. It's been quite a long break for me, and happy to be back.
I mean, so the basketball season is kind of weird, right? Because one, just the energy of basketball season and football season are not the same thing, and two, just the fact of football everywhere is a year-round sport as far as like covering what has to happen. It's like, hey, you guys may have noticed we have not yet talked about signing day for University of Idaho. Obviously, we're going to talk about that at some point. It's not today, but we have more football stuff to talk. We've got more coach stuff to run through so we can all be familiar with coaches once the season starts. Today's really a basketball day because we have the basketball season. It's not that far away from being over, Marten, which, you know, is kind of weird to say, but like, hey, men and women, they've got 5 regular season games.
Less than a month away from the season.
Yeah,
for all the teams.
Season finale. It will be in Bozeman, regular season finale, and hopefully this regular season finale does not conclude like the football season finale did in Bozeman. But that last game is March 3rd. We're recording on February 18th. Basketball season, it just also has this weird pattern because it starts, especially when your football team's actually good, it starts during football. So it's, you know, our coverage doesn't really ramp up until we're legitimately a third of the way through the season. but the rhythm's just different. Hey, James Aldrich in the comments section. We don't usually promote other shows, but we'll make an exception here. James Aldrich. I talked a bit about signing day on the most recent Vandal scoreboard if anyone needs their fix. So hey, listen to James talk about the signees. We're gonna get there. We have a couple things to get to. First, Martin's got to keep styling his beard on camera, so we do have that to take care of. But we also want to make sure Dallas is in for that. We might have to bring in recruiting expert Patty Frakes, who, speaking of shows we usually don't want to promote, Patty's been doing a bunch of stuff for Eagle Power Hour to talk about their signing class. So if you really want to hear about a signing class, it's not Idaho's, listen to Eagle Power Hour. But look, we've talked for a while about what is not happening on the show, right? So we might as well talk about what is happening on Tubbs the Club today, brought to us by Hughes River Expedition. So look, I'm going to start talking about the men's team, and then we'll shift to talking about the women's team too. They both are on similar tracks, you might say, as of late. Martin, I'm not going to proclaim which direction those tracks are heading in. Trevin's not here with us to help us there. But the men's, since we've recorded, men's team has played 3 games. Went 1-2 in those 3 games. As of today, spoiler alert, our University of Idaho men's team sits at 11-15 on the season, 6-7 in conference play. They're tied for, depending on how you want to count, 5th place or 8th place. There's a 3-way tie between Idaho State, Idaho, and Eastern Washington at 6-7 that, as of now, Idaho does not own any sort of tiebreak. Just to plant this in your head, as far as seeding is concerned, that would put Idaho at the number 7 seed in the Big Sky Conference tournament, which that starts on March 8th in Boise, Starch Madness. That would put Idaho playing in a first round game right now in Boise on March 8th against NAU if the season were to end today. So for the games that just took place the last 3 weeks, Idaho loses at home against Portland State 76-69 in a game that, by the way, that was not a sub 10-point game for like 90% of that game. Idaho was getting their ass kicked by Portland State until, honestly, Titus Yearout had his most productive outing as a Vandal, scored 14 points, going 4-5 from the field, 4-4 from the charity stripe. All of that production came late in the game, and pretty much Titus Yearout is the guy who made that score look respectable. That was not an actually respectable game. Idaho just got their ass kicked for most of that Portland State game. Against Sacramento State, Idaho tried very hard to lose to the worst team in the conference, trailed 47-39 at the end of the first half, held on for a 2-point victory, 78-76. Jack Payne, 21 points, big day for him. Tyler Morris, also 17 points. Tyler Linhart, 16 off the bench. Then most recently, this one was rough. Because look, Idaho picks up that win at Sac State, ties their win total at 11 for last year. We can handle math. There's 5 games left in the season. Idaho's still sitting at 11 wins. So we'll get to what that means for what you want to describe as progress later on, Martin. But against Eastern Washington, Idaho controls this game for 90-ish% of the action and finds a way to lose 75-73, led by as many as 10, or led by about 10 with 6 minutes left in the game. Idaho really, really fell apart to close this one. The Vandals were led by Jack Payne again, 16 points. Christian Gonzalez, 13 points as well. Julius Mims, 13 points. Isaiah Brickner had one of his best games of the season, scoring 17 points, going 5 for 5 from the field. Not that we can bank on 5 for 5, but hey, if you can do it, you can do it. That's Idaho's run of 3 games. Really, there's a lot of ways to look at this. I mean, Idaho probably should have lost the Sac State game, pulled it out. They should have beat Eastern, found a way to lose. So, I mean, that's what up and down 500-ish teams do. They win games they shouldn't. They lose games they shouldn't. They make games that they probably should control look pretty tight. That's just the up and down nature of what this basketball team is. But Martin, first, before I get to other takeaways, you were in Cheney. So, I mean, you were in Moscow. I mean, you were there for the Sacramento State and the Portland State game as well. So you were there for those 3 games. Anything stand out to you about those 3 before I talk about other stuff?
I want to say it was the Portland State game. That one I left early because I was like, I am not gonna. That was the one game I have. That is the one time I've walked out of a game early. It was that bad. Uh, but yeah, just speaking specifically of that and Sac State. Do you want me to talk Eastern a little bit, or
Whatever, man. You were at the
it
games. It's your
was,
call.
it was. It seemed like they kept the like just as like I'm not as big as the obviously as most people know I'm not as in tune or knowledgeable with the men's team, but it felt like it just felt like they never really tried to pull away. They tried to keep it close. It seemed like at instances.
Okay. So I'm going to say, like, my first takeaway and the takeaway, I think if you're watching this team, we've had some offensive, some complaints once in a while about what's going on offensively with Idaho. It's an evolving system with, with what Idaho has with no single star player. What the team can do offensively is really dictated by who can step up and who can't. And for a lot of the season, Idaho had some problems with just being way too complacent with not putting pressure on the defense. I thought that happened in Portland State. But I will say against Eastern, Idaho did a pretty good job of not just settling for threes off like a first catch. I mean, there's a lot more ball movement, man, especially in that first half. Some pretty good ball movement. Idaho did a lot of things well offensively for a lot of the game. Obviously, they didn't do enough to pull away with the win. But my focus here is not going to be on what Idaho did offensively, because I mean, for even in counting the loss to Portland State, Idaho has been their field goal percentage was atrocious for most of that game. Like I said, Titus Yearout really was kind of the comeback at the end. But Idaho's doing okay as a whole offensively. I mean, their offensive rating is near dead center in the country, like 117 out of 364. The issue is this was never a good defensive team, but this team is just completely fallen apart defensively down the stretch. I mean, right now, defensively, they're 334th out of 364 in the nation out of defensive rating. So, like, hey, not trying to obsess over stats without talking about the game itself, right? So, what does that mean? Well, Idaho lets teams are able to penetrate against Idaho far too easy. And there are times where there's defensive lapses where I think it's, just guys misunderstanding rotations, blowing assignments. You can do that in basketball too, just like in football. Idaho has stretches where they just give away too many open shots. And what you're seeing, if you look at, again, just to hit a stat for a second, the Mendoza line of like a solid defensive outing, if you're just talking about defensive rating, is below 100. That's how many points per possession that you're giving up. Teams that give up high numbers of point per possession, it's pretty simple in basketball. It means you're either doing some combination of giving up too many open shots, or teams are able to penetrate and collapse defense and either get to the rim or get open shots. That's kind of what Idaho has been doing from what I've seen, especially the second half of games. And it's part of why against Eastern, even though in the first half, Idaho shot very well, the Vandals should have had much more, a bigger cushion, let's say, heading into the second half. And it was just defensive lapses to me that explained why Eastern was able to keep it close in the first half, and part of why Idaho fell apart late in the game. Different thing you could say, you could also look at the Eastern game isn't our best example here, but like against Sac State and against Portland State, Sac State and Portland State, Sacramento State shot just under 56% on the game. Portland State shot 50% on the game. Teams don't do that in basketball in consecutive games unless you're giving up way too many open looks or way too many looks close to the basket, which is a lot of what Idaho has done. Well, honestly, they haven't had a defensive rating below 100 since January 2nd against Montana State. And I just think it's really catching up with Idaho, that Idaho, they're just not making teams pay for mistakes on the defensive side of the ball. So that's the first takeaway. And to me, that's the big limiting factor. It does not matter what Idaho does offensively. They're a solid offensive team. But if you are one of the 30 worst defensive teams in the country, you're going to be able to beat or lose to essentially anyone. And hey, that's what we've seen Idaho do, right, Martin? We've seen Idaho beat and then beat Northern Colorado and look competitive multiple times against Montana. Montana's looking like a really good basketball team right now. And Idaho competed just fine against the Grizzlies both times. But then that's the same team that needed essentially a miracle to hold on against Sacramento State and just gave away the game against Eastern Washington. So until Idaho, and I don't know if that's how much that's really going to change with just the makeup of the roster. Idaho's thin with size. They're super easy to get in foul trouble. Kyson Rose did not play against Eastern, which makes Idaho further kind of limited defensively. My man, Tyler Linhart, really fun offensive player. We know why he doesn't start. It's defensive issues, right? Well, if he's your number 2 big, that's just a team that's not exactly going to be enforcing much defensively. And if you just look at what Idaho's athleticism is on the wing, it's not really lateral quickness. And there you go. There's a lot of compounding factors that can help explain why Idaho can't really guard teams that well. They need to do better. They can't be bottom like 17-ish or bottom 30 in the nation if they want to pick up a win in the tournament. But yes, Martin, lateral moves. That's where the Vandals are. They're doing fine offensively, but they're just and like the offensive stuff is a little bit glaring because when Idaho is complacent offensively, it's annoying as hell to watch. But that is clearly not the big issue with the team. The team is overall fine offensively. They're just getting murdered defensively. And I think, and that's a huge limiting factor for a team that can score, but then can't get separation the way they need to, like they did against Eastern. So before we shift over to women's talk, Martin, I do want to hit the tournament bracket, and I do want your thoughts here. Idaho sits at 11 wins. I think it's a really big deal for Idaho to get not just 12, but I really think Idaho's got to get closer to something like 14, 15 for this to be like meaningful progress. If we're talking like 11, 12, like whatever, that's essentially the exact same team, which by the way, early in the year, I kind of described the team as a more fun, slightly better version of the team last year, which I feel like that's panning out just fine. But as of today, as referenced earlier, the men sit at playing in the first round against Northern Arizona. Not an atrocious matchup by any means. But if Idaho were to push to let's say string together a few wins in the last 5 games, look, they've got to finish above 500 the last 5 games to me. They absolutely have to get to that 14 to get to 14 wins. That'd be finishing 3-2. I think that's important, but a team that can lose to anyone can also lose 4 games in a row. I'm not saying they will, but that's not a option that you'd say is off the table, just like going 4-1 is not 100% off the table. But if Idaho were to sneak in a couple extra wins, they'd be looking at either playing in the second, based off the bracket we're looking at, Martin, either playing in the first round against Portland State, like Eastern Washington is, well, that's second round, like Eastern Washington right now is slated because Eastern and Idaho State both win tie breaks over Idaho right now. Or you look at Idaho State, they're playing Montana State in round 2. So I guess my question for you, Martin, what are you hoping for this men's team? Would you rather they play a winnable first round game against a team like NAU, Weber State, or Sac State, or they get a first round bye, but it might be a tougher matchup? Like, for example, Portland State is an atrocious matchup for Idaho, which is one of the teams very likely Idaho would be playing at if they could sneak into a first round bye, or, a team like Montana State, Idaho State.
I would rather take where they're at now, maybe get a win or 2 and maybe see if they can jump to that. I'd say get a win or 2 because I just want to see. I would rather see. Maybe I'm rambling here, but like honestly, where they're at, maybe going up to the what's Weber State, Brian? You're muted.
You're asking what Weber State's at?
Yeah.
So Weber State is the number 9 team in the conference.
Okay. Yeah, I honestly say if I would rather my gut said I'd love to see them win. But like I'd rather, like, if they stayed where they're at, I'd be happy too, just because I just want to see them win a game in Boise at this point. It hasn't happened yet. And I think they need to get that sort of dark cloud off of them right now.
You think getting a first win in Boise? Now, I'm going to say 2 things at once.
Yeah.
Because when we're saying like, hey, does this matter for, like, let's say the psyche of the team and the fan base versus like, hey, what helps for recruiting? I think for recruiting, it's not that big a deal either way, because, like what you're selling in Moscow for, some of the higher level recruits that could maybe be, first team all Big Sky in the future, is you're selling them on like, hey, the team's improving and you could be the piece that we're missing. So like that, I don't think that changes too much, regardless of whether Idaho gets a first round bye or whether they're playing in the first round. But I do feel that for, kind of like the psyche of the team, the psyche of the fan base, a tournament win matters. The tournament's been in Boise for a while. Idaho has what you should call de facto home court advantage. And because the team's just been so bad for so long, there isn't any actual home court advantage because, just no one orients their entire weekend around watching a team that has not won anything for more than half a decade. But I think for me, the win total if Idaho can play a first round, pick up a win, I just actually want that extra win in the record column. One, to just try to show some more separation between Pribble's second year and, the era that came before. But the other part is just for this to be growth, for you to think of it as growth. We do need to acknowledge that, I think this is a slight down year for the Big Sky with the caveat. I don't think it's a down year for the bottom of the conference. I actually think the bottom and middle of the conference are very competitive and absolutely on par with other years. It's more the top 4 teams in the conference I don't think are quite as strong as they have been in other years, which still translates to say in at least a somewhat down year for Big Sky basketball, they got to get to like 15-ish wins. And I don't think they do that without getting a first round win in the Big Sky Conference tournament. With caveat being, the matchup is what matters. Because if Idaho's not going to guard anyone, there's certain teams you'd rather play in the first round. Idaho NAU, that's a questionable matchup. We'll see how that goes in Flagstaff later. But Idaho didn't look fantastic against NAU in Moscow. But also, hey, Idaho in the first round against Sac State or against Weber State, I don't know, that's okay. Why not 51 in the comment section? Need to get away from Portland State, match up better against the Montanas. Yeah, absolutely. Idaho and Portland State is an atrocious matchup. Everything Portland State does as far as like pressure, having size, is something Idaho has no counter for really on either side of the ball. But hey, that's a long way of saying I think I want Idaho to get a win in the tournament over getting a bye. But there has to be an asterisk here. Just look at the way the team has progressed throughout the season, as far as like what we just talked about. Idaho's lost 3 of their last 4. And if you go back to NAU, they've won 2 of their last 6. This is absolutely a team that can lose to anyone. They can be competitive with anyone, but they can absolutely lose to anyone. So just playing in the first round does not mean they're going to pick up a win. I think these last 5 games matter for Idaho to kind of right the ship, get on the right track, you might say, because I don't know, like we know they're a 500-ish team. We know this team's ceiling is probably a first round win and maybe sneak in based off their matchup, a win in the second round. They're not going to make a run to the championship. I don't think anyone here believes that. But I think getting together these last 5 games matters for this team. I think they believe they're significantly better than last year's team, but until they actually pick up a handful of wins to create that separation, they're still sitting at 11 wins again with 3 of their last 4 games being losses. The trend line is clearly going in the wrong direction. They've got about 2 weeks and change to change that. So, Martin, any last words you want to say for the men's team? Okay, I see nothing in the comment section. To hit that, we have James Aldridge. Can we please, for the love of Joe Vandal, stop thinking Idaho teams need to be great in year 1 or year 2 of rebuild? Now, I'm curious where you got that from, James, because I think we've been pretty clear here that, hey, this is a 500-ish team, but the trend line is moving in the wrong direction. If they finish 500-ish, that's cool. Like, we'll be happy. But until they get some space between 11 wins, they're still sitting at a team that won 11 wins last year and is at 11 wins this year. So I guess that's the Tubbs of club take. I think Tubbs has been pretty goddamn mild about talking about the men's team. Captain 58, because the bottom of the conference is bet Bottom of the conference is better because we don't totally suck anymore. Correct. Tom Kendall Green, we don't want to see PSU. James Aldrich, I'm fine winning 1 or 2 games here and getting Weber in round 1. That's our best matchup. I think Sac State's the best matchup, but either of those two are fine. Jason Mayer, I'd rather the team get a bye and finish the season on a strong streak. Now, that is a point to bring up. If they get a bye, it implies they picked up some wins. So maybe Jason's on the right track here. And last couple things, we have James Aldrich. We could have the NAU run from a couple years ago. I mean, yeah, we could, but just the way this team plays defense, I don't see it. But if we get some wins, I'll be happy. That's enough. That's kind of how we talk about on the show. Shilshul Vandal, I think the Eastern game took most of our expectations back to reality. Cosign there. Patty Frakes, they've had like 2 of those runs, I swear, talking NAU. And James, that was based directly on Jonathan's comment. Y'all are on the right track for expectations. Okay, James. Tubbs the Club, Supreme Court, you are officially adjudicated. Before we hit the women's team, we got to talk something which Martin has it geared up. Hughes River Expedition. So Dallas is not here, so it's going to sound different. If you're looking for a great all-inclusive week-long vacation, don't look past your backyard. Hughes River Expeditions has been Vandal-owned and operated since 1976 and are ready to take you on a vacation of a lifetime. Enjoy a multi-day trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, the main Salmon River No Return, the Salmon River Canyons, or the Selway. Check out special trips like the one to see the Perced Meteor Shower. Camp on pristine bitches. Run amazing whitewater, hike scenic trails, spot wildlife, soak in beautiful natural hot springs, and fish some of the most remote stretches of river in the country. You just bring her close. Let HRE handle the rest. So grab a paddle, catch dinner, and ride the bull all throughout the Jeb State. Call them now at 406-540-4450 or check them out at hughesriver.com. Martin, it's time.
Yeah. Sorry, I spaced out. Someone texted me something. Brian, can you tell me what you're talking about now? Sorry.
Well, we're talking about your half of the show.
Yes.
There's only 2 halves.
There's some rust. There's some rust going on here.
That thing that you focus on exclusively during basketball season. Maybe comment section can help Martin out. Like, hey, Martin, what's that whole thing you focus on, go to every goddamn game for? Oh, yeah, the women's team. All right, Martin, take it away. Women's team, what's going on?
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's second half of the season's obviously been a little bit of a stinker. It's ever since kind of the second half started counting 9 and 9 wise for the 18 games was the Weber State NAU turn. And I think I can't remember who I was talking to. I'm sure they'll remember who they were. But like it hasn't been good. It has been rather rough, and kind of then talking about it I should also backtrack and talk about the past 3 games. They're on a 2-game losing streak. They've won 2 of their last 5, and it's been these last 2 games that against Idaho for Eastern have been Eastern and Sacramento State. They both, I'd say, probably should have won. Sacramento State, they gave up an 8-0 run to end the game. And Eastern, they came back from 13 down, and I think 13 at half, I should say, had a chance to win it with like 30-something seconds left against Eastern, and I don't know what happened on that final play. It just was kind of I'm not going to beat around the bush. It was a clusterfuck. And somehow Eastern gets the ball back, gets the layup, and then when Idaho tries to rush a 3, it gets blocked. I can't remember who blocked it for Eastern, but like Hope Passman's 3 gets blocked. And it hasn't been a fun second half as much the fun as this first half was, but the NAU loss, as James has kind of been James Aldridge kind of mentioned in the comments, they haven't been right since.
Yeah, if you go back there to that point in the season, Martin, the women's team, they're on the exact same track the men's team has been recently. There's a couple flipped results in there, but since that NAU, counting that NAU loss, the Vandal women they've won 2 of their last 6 games. They're still sitting conference-wise. They're still number 3 team in the conference. They have a 1-game conference lead over Weber State. It's going to be very tough for the women's team to not have a first-round bye. but they're, as you've commented on, like, hey, if they've had this rough run, I mean, we were feeling pretty high about the women's team heading into that NAU game.
Obviously, things happened at that NAU game. They lose by 30. But it's granted, NAU, I'll say, is the best. Not the best. They've lost to Montana State. It's 1-2. Like Idaho, Montana State, and NAU are clear number 1 and number 2. There is no Idaho's not getting there the rest of the season. I'm pretty comfortable in saying that. It kind of, as I said before, as I think I've said, like it kind of seems like they're like, obviously it's with any season, people get film on you, and now teams having a whole half of conference play, they're able to scheme they're able to scheme, it seems like, against Idaho and play better against them. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Montana's the number in NCAA net ratings. Montana State is the number 54 team in women's basketball. That's a very, very good team. Now, Northern Arizona's sitting in number 90. So that's probably, Montana State's good enough that it's a very real question about should they be an at-large team if they don't win the conference, if the Bobcats don't win the conference tournament. NAU's outside that discussion, but top 100 in the Big Sky is pretty good. The men haven't had a top 100 NCAA net rated team for a long time. But like what you're saying is everyone understood those the top 2. But
Yes.
That seemed that Idaho was a class of their own at 3. And look, I'm going to make a case that they still are, because look, hey, basketball season is different than football season. Point I thought I'd get to talking men, but I can get to it here. So in football season, we're always sometimes having to make like kind of exaggerated interpretations of how to understand a team, because each game is more evidence what the team can and cannot do. But like the season's not that long. Men's and women's basketball, oh man, we get a sample size of more than 30 games. By game 20, we pretty much know who the teams are and what their ceiling should be. And I bring that up because we felt pretty good about the women's team. Well, even in this rough run, the 2 losses that have happened recently, Sac State and Eastern, eminently winnable games for Idaho. They lose both of those games by 3. Now they lost the games, but those are results where, hey, if the team makes a single other shot during the game and that result flips, what you're talking about is like, hey, like we're anxious that they're kind of bottoming out, but they're still winning when they're bottoming out. That's evidence of a good team. Now they're not, but I think there's not that much for the women's team to really need to pick up for us to start feeling a little bit better. I just want to look at both those games. I feel are relatively instructive of how the season's been for Idaho. Idaho has been scoring the ball pretty dang well. And it's been a little bit of a down tick, honestly, from Idaho State. That's 4 games ago. Idaho State, since our women's team has only scored more than 60 points one game. That was the close win over Portland State, who, by the way, Portland State's a very one of the dregs of the Big Sky too. So this could have been a real ugly week for the women. So I mean, on one hand, I'd say like, hey, maybe you're lucky a team bottoms out against the worst team. You still have 5 games to get it together, but you're in the stands. I guess what would you say looks different about Idaho these last 6 games, or really narrowly these last 4 games, where the Vandals just haven't been scoring as well?
I'm just going to go ahead and state the obvious. They have not been shooting well. It's been, I think I can at least pull up the last 3. But looking at it, shot, oh gosh, I'm producing on the fly here, as I always like to do.
They were they were about 38% against Eastern and Sac State.
Yep, and then shot 42 against Portland State. It's best obvious answer is they're not shooting well. It seems like
20% loss.
It's
to Idaho State.
Yeah, that was knuckle popping, by the way. Don't think anything else. It's obvious answer is they're not shooting well. Sometimes it feels like they're rushing threes just to kind of going back to that John Newley shoot yourself out of a funk, which can work, but as we've seen in past, it can also lead to bad losses too.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. It's a game by game trend. Idaho, the women only shot 10 threes against Sacramento State. So it wasn't, just shooting a lot of threes that was causal in that game. Although, depending on who you're playing, sometimes a lot of it is matchups and also what the other team does. Sacramento State typically, as I recall, they play a little bit slower paced. James Aldridge in the comment section saying turnovers. In addition to James saying, Idaho is definitely in a position to get a WNIT invite if they close well, in my opinion. So that's a separate topic because the NIT has adjusted kind of what they do. I don't know anything about men's and women's basketball tournaments that are not the main NCAA one anymore, because after the NIT changed their format, not automatically inviting teams that won their conference without the auto bid.
Kind of quickly tag on what Patty said, this offense just goes where is just hopefully. Yep, Patty's right. Because if Olivia goes off, this offense does well. Because then defenses have to stop Olivia Nelson, and in the East, I'll kind of focus on the Eastern game because that's obviously the most recent one. She was not playing well the first half, then gets some sort of injury and somehow comes back and is playing tough and is essentially carried Idaho back, it seemed like, to make it a game in the second half against Eastern.
Yeah, she scored 20. Olivia Nelson scored 20 on the game against Eastern, which is a bit of a bounce back performance the week before against Sacramento State in that 3-point loss to the Hornets. Nelson goes 1 of 8 for 5 points. Really, Hope Hasman carried the team against Sac State, 7-7 for 19 points.
Yeah. Yeah, and like Tom is saying now, that they're keying in on her, but I'm not gonna focus on just one player. This is a team sport after all. It's Brian, I'm blanking on something. Give me something to talk about right now. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, so let's look at the bracket real quick for the women. So the women are number 3 in the Big Sky. And that's a relatively safe place to expect that they'll finish around either 3 or 4. Okay. So right now at 3, they would be matched up against Montana in round 2. And I mean, Weber State, I'm saying that because Weber's close. Weber's matched up in the bye on the other side of the bracket against Eastern in the first round. So because we pretty much know Idaho's going to get a first round bye in the tournament, first, and they're not going to take over spot 1 or 2. So NAU and Montana State, they kind of own those positions. It's really a matchup thing that you care about for Idaho. Marten, out of Montana, Weber, and Eastern, which is the matchup you think is best for Idaho, to put Idaho in position to win. Second round would be their first first game of the Big Sky Conference tournament.
Do you give Idaho the best chance at a win?
Yeah.
Right now, I'd say it's probably a toss-up between Montana and Weber State. I'm not saying I'm not scared against Eastern, but the Saturday game kind of gives me a little pause for concern against playing them a third time. But those are kind of like the two 1A, 1Bs as far as who I'd want to see around the first game for Idaho and Boise.
Well, yeah, and so Montana, one of the benefits is, I mean, if you don't follow Big Sky basketball, you might not know this. Montana women's basketball coach Brian Holsinger resigned mid-season. They're being run by interim coach Nate Harris right now. I'm not deeply into on why Holsinger resigned, but he was placed on leave, in January. So Montana's a team that has some instability, where you can understand why that'd be a favorable matchup. But out of those 3, I guess, why do you like the matchup you like?
Part of it is we've already beaten Montana 2 times, and I know it's hard to beat 2 teams a third time in a season, but I feel like Idaho could do it again, do it a third time against them.
Both wins were by 13, so there was they're early in the year. But both those wins, there was a healthy cushion.
Yeah. I still think, though, it's I feel comfortable against them. Weber, I know they went and beat Eastern, and I know they went and beat Eastern and Cheney a couple weeks ago. I know, having been told like they're pretty short staffed, they only had 8 suited and they played all 8 and rotated the best they could. So it's a little, I'm kind of talking myself out of Weber State, but still I feel pretty comfortable against them. If it was, I feel like with the way the way Idaho plays, I feel like they could do pretty well against those two teams.
Okay. James Aldrich, Montana has individuals who do well, but don't play great as a team. Christy Mayer clarifying that Olivia Nelson had 6 points in the first half on Saturday, meaning she put up 14 in the second half. So Jonathan Jacobs, Coach Moira has done an incredible job considering the cluster that was the Amy departure. Last few weeks have been ugly, but if you said we'd be third in the Big Sky right now before the season, deal. I'm with you 100%. It's more just riding the ship because, look, I mean, the story of the women's team has been a fun story to track. Now, no story that stories divide of drama they're not the best ones. So, like, hey, maybe if the team turns it around, we might be, you might be able to look back and say, okay, well, look, we didn't want to lose games, but hey, it's up and down. Made the season a little bit more interesting. We knew the team was not going to be number 1 or 2 because there's a big gap, I think, between Montana State, NAU, and the rest of the conference. Idaho's just pretty clearly number 3. And again, 2 really close losses away from having more cushion between Idaho and Weber State right now. So again, I think you should keep that in mind. You're doing your arithmetic on what to think of the women's team. Before we close this will be a little bit shorter because we try to fit a football topic in. We're just not going to do that today. Martin, anything else you want to close with on women's basketball?
I'm not too worried, and you two guys shouldn't be worried as well. I know there's probably some doom posting and some stuff like that, or doom thoughts, but this team, I think if you were I think as others have said, I think it was Jonathan Jacobs said it before the season, if they had taken 3rd before the season, you guys would have been happy with that. And I'll be honest, I didn't vote this year, but I know, and I was kind of thinking about it, and I probably would. I'll be honest, I probably would have put them around 8, 9, not 8, 9, 7, kind of fighting for the bottom 6 for a first round bye. But still, they've done a lot better. They've shown they can play. And you know what? And if you want, damn it, I'm gonna go into Thursday's fucking game against NAU thinking they're gonna win. God heckin' damn it! I swear, dang it, I did it again.
Let me out myself here too. Like you talk about preseason voting.
Yeah,
I don't even look. I do vote in football for in preseason polls, not just in Idaho's placement, but for the Player of the Year awards, which we usually farm out to a average vote from our hashtag OnlyTub Discord members, patreon.com/Tubs the Club. Support the show for as little as a cup of coffee a month or more. Basketball, I don't even think just because of how transfer stuff changes, the compilation of the roster. Like, hey, look, we lived through the football horror story, but a lot of the names on the roster returning are returners, right in football. Basketball, I'm talking conference now, not just Idaho. There's enough turnover at the conference level that it's very hard to have any gauge on any team whatsoever. So I legitimately abstain from voting in the preseason basketball polls because I don't know anything about, like, when a team has virtually no returners coming back. Like, hey, Northern Arizona lost their top 2 or 3 scores. Sorry, Northern Colorado lost their top 2 or 3 scores. No one had any idea who in God's name was going to step up for Northern Colorado. So, and the Bears are number 1, number 2 in the Big Sky for a reason. Which long way of saying no one knows who the rosters are, so I don't really vote in basketball anymore because I think it's a waste of time. There we go. I'm out. I'm out in the open. Football is different. Basketball, man, unless you're so damn in the weeds on low major transfers, I don't know how you do anything except throw darts at a board.
Yeah, I do research probably way too much more than I should, but yeah.
Well, and then voting for so if you're not part of this, which most people aren't, you're listening, the way this works for voting is the league coaches submit to the league. They're potential guys to vote for. And then the league sends out an online mailer where you fill out how you think the teams are going to finish 1 through 10 in basketball season. And then you vote for all conference players, and they'll have the suggested players to vote for that the coaches list. With the volume of transfers, like when I looked at this 2 years ago, legitimately, there was like 3 guys who averaged double figures the year before. So it's like, what in God's name am I doing this for? But that's not that important. That's in the weeds of, if you're curious why we sound different, or I might sound different talking transfers, basketball and football, it's just because they're completely different monsters. You only need 5 guys on the floor for basketball. So whatever, things change. Martin, this is one of our rare call it a night early nights. We'll be back next week. Of course, we're back kind of on a regular schedule. Pull the curtain back for those who care. I essentially was getting my ass kicked in nursing school right off of having the flu. So that's why I need to take a week off. Dallas was out of town, and then Dallas had some stuff come up this week. So basketball season, it's just a little bit different getting a regular schedule. It's how it works, guys. Also, like, if we all get sick during flu season, like, I don't know what the hell we're supposed to do. So we will be back next week. Dallas should be back. Very good chance we get some football stuff. Although, spoiler alert, I actually didn't. I mean, it's going to be a smaller crew as far as like views. I'm fine with that. I don't mind taking a break from football once in a while. Like, we're going to have the signees to talk about. You went to the signing day event, of course, in Moscow. So you've got some on the ground stuff from head coach Tom Ford to talk about.
We all need veggies, not just meat all the time.
Jesus Christ. Or in your case, microphones, right? So anyway, I believe it's the VSF Gala in Boise this week. So like, hey, there'll be football stuff and money stuff to talk coming up. But you know what? Sometimes it's nice to just kind of relax, stick your feet up, and, have some celery, you might say. So, Martin, thanks for coming in.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone in the comment section, thanks for coming in to James, Patty, Mayers, Tom Kendall. You guys are MVPs of this episode. Like Tom Kendall saying, get to ICCU Thursday to get a body bag. Tom Kendall saying the VSF Gala is the 28th. My bad. So that's 10 days from now. Thank you. That's why we have a comment section to correct people like myself. So VSF Gala, February 28th. We'll obviously have stuff to talk about after that. But until then, I'm ready to call it a night. We'll see you next week. And as always, go Vandals.